I sat in the Maple Grove Diner in Nashville, Tennessee, under the harsh midday sun streaming through the windows. The place was buzzing with the clatter of plates, the sizzle of butter on the griddled children's laughter, and the weary sighs of folks just off their shifts. Across from me was my 7-year-old daughter Sophie, her curly brown hair falling over her face as she scribbled in her worn coloring book. In front of us sat 2 plain pancakes and a glass of water, our modest meal scraped together from the last $17 in my wallet. I was Jack Turner, 38, a single dad scraping by as a night security guard at a factory on the south side of town. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, my hands rough from years of manual labor, but I forced a smile for Sophie. She deserved that much. At the next table, an elderly couple, a Henry and Martha Bellamy, fumbled awkwardly searching for a lost wallet. They looked flustered, explaining to the cashier that it must have fallen out in the taxi. The manager barked, "No money, no service, don't pull that sob story here." Some customers averted their eyes, others shook their heads, but no one stepped up. I clenched my fists. Those $17 were meant for milk and rice next week, but I couldn't just sit there. I stood, walked to the counter, and said quietly, "Please use this to cover their bill." The manager frowned. "You know them." "No," I replied, "but no one deserves to be humiliated over a lost wallet." I placed the money down and returned to my seat, trying to act casual. Sophie looked up, her big eyes curious. "Why did we pay for them, Daddy?" I ruffled her hair. "Because if we ever end up in a spot like that, I'd hope someone would do the same for us." Little did I know that simple act would knock on my door and change everything. After leaving the diner, I trudged back to our run-down apartment in North Nashville, the weight of the day pressing down on me like the humid Tennessee air. The building was an old brick relic with peeling paint on the walls and creaky wooden floors that groaned under every step. Sophie skipped ahead, her coloring book clutched under her arm, oblivious to the cracks in the ceiling or the faint, musty smell that never quite went away. She was my light in this dim place, but even she couldn't chase away the shadows of worry that haunted me every night. I unlocked the door to our 1-bedroom unit on the ground floor. The living room doubled as Sophie's bedroom, with her curled up on the old pull-out sofa under a couple of thin blankets. I flicked on the single lamp, its weak bulb casting a yellowish glow over the sparse furnishings. A rickety table, a few mismatched chairs, and a small TV that only picked up 3 channels. The kitchenette was bare except for a half-empty box of cereal and a few cans of soup. I sighed, dropping my keys on the counter, and sank into a chair. Before me lay the stack of bills that seemed to multiply like weeds. The rent was overdue by 10 days, $850 I didn't have. The electric bill threatened disconnection if I didn't pay the $120 balance soon. And then there was the hospital debt, a lingering ghost from 3 years ago when my wife Lisa fought ovarian cancer. We'd sold everything, the house, the car, to cover treatments, but it wasn't enough. She slipped away in that sterile room, leaving me with Sophie and a mountain of regret. I picked up the faded wedding photo on the table, Lisa smiling radiantly, her hand on her pregnant belly, me looking hopeful beside her. "I promised I'd take care of you both," I whispered, my voice cracking in the quiet. Those days felt like another life. Back then, I was a construction engineer fresh out of community college with steady work building homes in the suburbs. Life was simple weekend barbecues, plans for a bigger family. But cancer doesn't care about plans. I quit my job to be with Lisa, burning through savings on chemo and doctors. After she was gone, the grief hit like a freight train. I couldn't focus, lost contracts, and ended up taking whatever gig I could find. Now I patrolled a factory at night, watching shadows for $12 an hour, just enough to keep us afloat, but barely. Sophie stirred on the sofa, mumbling in her sleep. I tucked the blanket around her, kissing her forehead. She was the spitting image of her mom, those big brown eyes, that infectious laugh. But lately her questions cut deep. Why can't we have pizza like other kids? Daddy, or when can I have my own room? I always smiled and said soon. Kiddo, but inside it tore me apart. That night I barely slept. my mind replaying the diner scene. Why had I given away our last money-pride stupidity? In the morning, I rose at 5, brewing cheap black coffee while saving the last half-gallon of milk for Sophie's cereal. I sliced the bruised apple for her lunch, packed her backpack, and walked her to school, holding her tiny hand in mine. "Have a good day, princess," I said at the gate, watching her wave goodbye. Back home, I fired up my ancient laptop, its fan whirring like a dying engine. I typed out job applications, warehouse loader, delivery driver, car washer. Anything that didn't require a degree, I never finished. No responses as usual. The silence was broken by my phone ringing at 10, an unfamiliar number. "Jack Turner," a woman's voice asked, polite but formal. "Yes, that's me." "Mr. Henry Bellamy, the gentleman you helped at the diner yesterday, would like to meet you," he says. "If possible, let me thank the man who paid for my wife's lunch and mine. He got your address from the diner staff." I froze, staring at the phone. "He wants to see me. Why? He insists on coming by personally." I glanced around the cluttered room, my eyes landing on the eviction notice taped to the fridge. A stranger showing up at my door. It felt odd, maybe even suspicious. But what did I have to lose? The sun climbed higher outside, but inside a new unease settled in my chest when I couldn't quite name. At 11:15 sharp, there was a knock on my apartment door, firm but polite, not the aggressive pounding of a bill collector. I hesitated, wiping my hands on my jeans, glancing once more at the cluttered room. Sophie was at school, thank God. I didn't want her seeing strangers in our space. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. Standing there was a tall man in a light brown vest, his face lean and sharp, with silver hair neatly combed back. Beside him was an older woman, probably in her 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile, the same couple from the diner. "Jack Turner?" the man asked, extending a hand. His grip was strong, confident. "Yes," I said, shaking it. "You must be Mr. Bellamy." "Henry," he corrected with a nod. "And this is my wife, Martha." She stepped forward, her expression warm, almost grateful. "We wanted to thank you in person for what you did yesterday. It meant more than you know." I shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of my neck. "It was nothing, really. Just the right thing to do. Come in if you'd like." I stepped aside, suddenly self-conscious about the peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of dampness. They entered, Henry scanning the room with a neutral gaze, no judgment, just observation. Martha's eyes softened as she spotted Sophie's coloring book on the table. "A simple place," Henry remarked, not unkindly. "Clean, though. Reminds me of where I started out back when I was scraping by in a studio apartment downtown, working odd jobs to pay for night school." I nodded, unsure what to say. "Can I get you some coffee? It's not much, but—" "No need," Henry interrupted gently. "We're not here to impose." He reached into his leather bag and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the table. "Yesterday, you showed compassion to 2 strangers without a second thought. That's rare these days. I run Bellamy Development Group. We build community housing projects across Tennessee, and right now I have an opening for a site supervisor on our new Eastwood development. The last guy quit abruptly, and I've been looking for someone reliable." I stared at the envelope, my heart skipping a beat. Me. A site supervisor. "Mr. Bellamy, Henry, I appreciate it, but I'm just a security guard. No degree, no certifications. I've bounced around jobs since my wife passed. How could I possibly—" He held up a hand. "It's not about papers on a wall, Jack. It's about character, integrity. The kind of man who pays for someone else's meal when he can barely afford his own. That's the kind I want on my team. No shortcuts, no egos. Just someone who gets the job done and treats people right." Martha chimed in softly. "We asked around at the diner after you left. The staff said you're a regular, always polite, even on tough days. And with a little girl to raise alone, well, we know That's not easy. I felt a lump in my throat. Sophie. Everything I did was for her, but this, it sounded too good to be true. Why me? You don't even know if I can handle blueprints or manage a crew. Henry smiled faintly. I started my company from nothing, no fancy education, just grit. I see that in you. The envelope has the office address and a slot for an interview tomorrow at 9 a.m. No pressure, but if you show up, the job's yours to prove. They didn't stay long after that. Martha gave me a quick hug at the door, whispering, "Thank you again, dear. Not just for the meal, for reminding us kindness still exists." Henry shook my hand once more. "Think about it, Jack. Opportunities like this don't knock twice." As the door closed, I stood there, envelope in hand, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to toss at strangers offering jobs out of nowhere. It felt like a scam or worse, pity. I wasn't some charity case. But then I thought of the bills, the empty fridge, Sophie's hopeful eyes when she asked for things I couldn't give. And Lisa, God, what would she say? She'd tell me to grab it to fight for our girl. I paced the room weighing the risks. What if I bombed the interview? What if this Bellamy guy was just blowing smoke, but staying put meant more nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how to stretch $17 that were now gone? No, I couldn't afford to pass this up. For Sophie, I'd go. I'd put on my best shirt, swallow my pride, and walk through that door. The next morning I arrived at the Bellamy Group office, a modern building in downtown Nashville, all glass and steel worlds away from my crumbling apartment. My palms were sweaty as the receptionist led me to a conference room. Henry was there along with two other men in crisp shirts, project managers, I guessed. They eyed me skeptically, one whispering something I couldn't catch. "Jack," Henry greeted warmly. "Glad you came." We sat, and the questions started, not the grilling I expected, but casual talk about my work history. I told them about my years on construction sites before Lisa got sick, how I'd picked up skills reading plans on the job, estimating materials without fancy software. One of the managers leaned forward. "No formal training. That's a red flag for a supervisor role." Henry waved it off. "Experience trumps paper. Jack's got it." But as the meeting wrapped, the other manager pulled me aside in the hallway. "Look, Henry's a good guy, but watch yourself. There was a lawsuit a few years back, accusations of financial shortcuts on projects. Cleared up, but just saying." My stomach twisted. A lawsuit. Was this why the job opened suddenly? I thanked him, but doubt flooded in. Had I walked into a trap, Sophie needed stability, not more chaos. But turning back now felt like giving up. I shook Henry's hand, agreeing to start Monday, all while wondering if I just made the biggest mistake of my life. The next morning, I stood outside the Bellamy Development Group office in downtown Nashville, staring up at the sleek glass facade that reflected the bustling city streets. It was a world away from my dingy apartment, the kind of building where deals were made in air-conditioned rooms, not scraped together in factory lots. I adjusted my only clean shirt, the one I'd ironed twice to hide the frayed collar, and gripped my empty folder like a lifeline. My heart pounded as I walked in the reception area, smelling of fresh coffee and polished marble. The young woman at the desk glanced at me, her smile polite but brief. "Jack Turner, Mr. Bellamy's expecting you. Conference room 2. I followed her down the hall, my worn shoes silent on the carpet. The room was bright with a long oak table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Cumberland River. Henry was already there, seated at the head, flanked by two men in crisp button-downs, project managers, I assumed. One was burly with a clipboard, the other lean and bespectacled, typing on a laptop. Henry stood when I entered, shaking my hand firmly. "Jack, good to see you made it. Have a seat. This is Tom Riley and Mark Evans, my leads on the Eastwood project." I nodded, sitting down, feeling like an intruder in my own story. "Thanks for having me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. They didn't waste time on small talk. Tom, the burly one, leaned forward. "So, Henry says you're interested in the site supervisor role. Walk us through your experience." I took a breath and started talking. I told them about my early days as a construction engineer right after community college, how I'd overseen small builds in the suburbs, framing houses, managing crews of 10 or 12. I learned blueprints on the job, I explained. No fancy software back then. I'd sketch them out by hand, calculate loads and materials in my head to save time. I described the tricks I'd picked up spotting weak beams before they buckled, negotiating with suppliers to cut costs without skimping on safety. But then I got honest. That was before my wife got sick. Ovarian cancer. I quit to be with her, and after she passed, I took whatever paid the bills, night security mostly. No certification since, but I've kept my skills sharp, reading old manuals at the library. Mark, the one with glasses, jotted notes, his expression neutral. Impressive recall, but supervising a community housing project like Eastwood. It's 40 units, tight deadlines, inspections every week. You sure you're up for it without formal quals? Henry interjected before I could respond. Mark Toms heard this from me already. Experience beats paper. I started this company sweeping floors in a warehouse. No degree, just grit. Jack's got that. Tell them about that factory gig, Jack. I did explaining how I'd caught structural flaws during my patrols, once even alerting the foreman to a faulty support beam that could have collapsed a whole section. Save them a lawsuit, I added quietly. The room fell silent for a moment. Tom nodded slowly. All right, that checks out. Henry leaned back, smiling. See, the job's yours, Jack. Start Monday. Salary $62,000 a year, full benefits, health, dental, even a flexible schedule for picking up your daughter from school. I blinked, the number hitting me like a punch. $62,000. That was more than double what I made now. Enough to pay off the hospital debt, get Sophie into after-school programs, maybe even a real bed instead of that sofa. You're serious? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Just like that. Dead serious, Henry replied. You've got the instinct. And after what you did for us, let's call it karma, coming around. I wanted to jump at it, but doubt crept in. It felt too easy, too sudden. As we wrapped up, Mark pulled me aside in the hallway while Henry chatted with Tom. Listen, Jack, he said lowly, glancing over his shoulder. Henry's a stand-up guy, but there's talk. A few years back, there was an investigation, financial irregularities on a project. Overbilled materials, that sort of thing. It got cleared, but some folks think it was swept under the rug. Just watch your back if you sign on. My stomach dropped. An investigation. Was that why the previous supervisor quit so abruptly? I thanked Mark, but my mind raced as I left the building. Walking back to my truck, the city noise faded into a buzz. If this was a trap, if Bellamy Group was shady, I could lose everything. Sophie depended on me. I couldn't drag her into some corporate mess. But turning it down meant more nights scraping by, more not this month answers to her innocent wants. I drove home in a daze, replaying the conversation. Henry's story about starting from nothing resonated. He saw something in me that others didn't. But Mark's warning lingered like a shadow. By the time I picked up Sophie from school, I'd made up my mind. How was your day, kiddo? I asked as she hopped in her backpack slung over one shoulder. Good. We drew houses today, she beamed, holding up a crayon sketch of a big blue home with a yard. I smiled, ruffling her hair. Looks perfect. For her, I'd take the risk. Monday morning, I showed up at the Eastwood site, toolbox in hand, ready to prove myself. The crew eyed me warily, a new guy with no resume polish, but I dove in inspecting foundations and directing pours like I'd never left the field. Henry stopped by midday, clapping me on the back. Knew you'd fit right in. As the sun set over the half-built frames, I felt a spark of hope. But deep down, I wondered if the whispers about Henry were true and if my leap of faith would land me on solid ground or pull me under. 1 year had passed since that fateful interview, and the Eastwood Community Housing Project stood complete, a cluster of modest townhomes with fresh paint-green lawns and playgrounds buzzing with kids' laughter. I, Jack Turner, now the lead site supervisor, stood on a makeshift stage under the clear Tennessee sky, the ribbon-cutting ceremony unfolding before a crowd of residents, local officials, and my Bellamy group colleagues. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and barbecue from the celebration grills. Henry Bellamy himself introduced me, his voice booming over the speakers. This project isn't just bricks and mortar, it's built on trust and hard work. And no one embodies that more than Jack Turner. I stepped up, microphone in hand, my heart pounding not from nerves but from a quiet disbelief. Sophie, my little girl, waved frantically from the front row, her curly hair tied with a new ribbon, her smile wide enough to light the day. Beside her stood Henry and Martha, clapping like proud grandparents. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "When I started here, I was just a guy trying to keep his head above water. But this team and this community gave me a chance to build something real." The applause swelled, and as I cut the ribbon, I felt a weight lift, one I'd carried for years. The job had changed everything. With the steady paycheck, $62,000 a year, I chipped away at the debts. The overdue rent settled first, then the electric bills, and slowly the hospital shadow from Lisa's treatments faded. No more eviction notices or empty fridges. We'd moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of East Nashville with a small balcony overlooking a park. Sophie's room was painted soft blue walls, adorned with her drawings, houses, family's dreams she could now chase without worry. She started ballet classes after school, her laughter filling the evenings as she twirled in our living room. I'd learned the truth about Henry, too. The whispers Mark had shared, baseless rumors planted by a rival developer, jealous of Bellamy Group's success in affordable housing. An internal audit cleared it all months into my tenure. Henry had run a clean ship from the start. He'd confided in me one afternoon on site over coffee in a trailer. "People see success and assume shortcuts, but you and I know it's sweat and integrity that last." Our bond grew beyond boss and employee. He and Martha invited us for holidays, treating Sophie like the granddaughter they never had. "You're family now," Martha said once, hugging me tight. And then there was Emma. She worked in the office as a project coordinator, 35, with warm hazel eyes and a laugh that cut through the chaos of deadlines. We met during my first week, her handing me blueprints with a quick smile. "New guy, huh? Don't let the suits intimidate you." Over lunches and late-side checks, conversations deepened from work woes to personal stories. I shared about Lisa, the grief that still tugged at quiet moments. She opened up about her own losses, a divorce that left her starting over. Friendship turned to something more quiet, dinners, walks along the river with Sophie tagging along her small hand in Emma's. "She's amazing, Dad," Sophie whispered one night. And she was. Emma brought light back into my life, not replacing Lisa, but adding a new chapter. That evening after the ceremony, back in our apartment, I lit a small candle before Lisa's photo on the mantel. The flame flickered softly, casting shadows on the walls, now free of worry lines. Sophie was asleep in her room, clutching a stuffed bear from Martha. I sat there whispering to the picture. "I kept my promise, Lisa. We're okay now, thanks to one ordinary day and a moment I almost let pass." A soft knock interrupted Henry at the door, holding a simple card. "Didn't want to mail it," he said, handing it over. Inside, a neat script, "A meal paid forward became an opportunity. But true kindness, it never needs repaying." I shook his hand, emotion thick in my throat. "Thank you for everything." He nodded. "No, Jack. Thank you for reminding an old man that good still exists in this world." As he left, I closed the door, leaning against it. Sophie stirred, calling softly from her room. I went in, tucking her back under the covers. "Daddy today was the best," she murmured, eyes heavy. I kissed her forehead. "It was princess, and tomorrow will be even better." Lying in bed later with Emma's text lighting up my phone, a simple "proud of you," I reflected on it all. Life hadn't turned me into a millionaire. We weren't living in luxury. But we had enough stability, love, a future without fear. I'd started as a broken man, giving away my last dollars to strangers. Now, those strangers were family, and that act had rippled back tenfold. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that a small gesture can rewrite your story. And maybe out there somewhere, someone else is paying for a stranger's meal, starting their own chain of change.